Welcome to our Financial Transitionist Institute webinar for advisors. Love and Money. Financial advice helps widows navigate romance and finance. I'm glad you're interested in widows. Maybe you're already working with widow clients in your practice, or you want to expand that segment you serve. I'm your presenter, Kathleen Reel. Many of you know my background and the work that I do with widows. If you're meeting me now for the very first time, hello. This screen tells a bit more about me and my experience. I was a financial planner for 17 years before starting my encore career to assist more of my widowed sisters and their advisors. I wrote a guidebook for widows, and I've been quoted in lots of publications that you probably read. I'm pleased you're taking time from your day to learn more about what our team is doing, with a focus on research. Now's the time I need to make a full disclosure to you about all the big bucks I'm making to do this webinar. Wrong. No, I'm not being paid anything to create this webinar for you. Yes, Susan Bradley asked me to share the important research with you in this format, but as a faculty member of the Sudden Money Institute, which is also the Financial Transitionist Institute, my paycheck is $0. I do this because I believe in the Institute's work. Also, neither I nor any of my research colleagues were paid anything to do our research, and I didn't receive a fee to write the articles for the Journal of Financial Service Professionals. The nonprofits mentioned in this webinar, Modern Widows Club and Soaring Spirits International, they didn't pay me to promote membership in their organizations, or the Ambassadors Program that you'll hear about later. I created the Moving Forward on Your Own Foundation to help other widows. In fact, I basically transfer the profit from my book sales at Amazon and other book sales, plus more money into the foundation, and then give the money away to nonprofits that benefit widows and their children. And I wasn't paid to be on the PBS television program or by Plan Stronger TV talking about widows and money. Bottom line is that I'm doing this work because it's the right thing to do to directly or indirectly help my widowed sisters. I feel so blessed to do this. And you know what? The more that I give, the more that I receive in return, in terms of new friendships, opportunities to serve, and fulfilling my calling in life. Now let's delve into the main topic. I still remember his enthusiasm. So, honey, how do you want us to celebrate our 20th anniversary? Should be special. How about a Caribbean cruise? You know, I'm the luckiest husband to have married you, Kathleen, and I'm going to love you forever. But we didn't go on that cruise, and we didn't celebrate our special wedding anniversary either. That's because Tom died. Yep, I became a member of the club no woman wants to join, the Widows Club. But over time, my grief and pain turned into a new passion and purpose, speaking and writing, mentoring, and doing research about widows and their money issues. But before we talk about our most recent Love and Money study, let's review a few stunning statistics about widows. We widows are a fast-growing group. When a U.S. News and World Report journalist interviewed me for a story, he said, "Kathleen, it's like this tsunami of widows coming down the pike." He was right. More than 1 million women are widowed every year in our country. According to the Census Bureau, we total about 12 million, and with the baby boomer generation aging, we're heading quickly towards 13 million. By 2030, more than 20% of all U.S. residents are projected to be age 65 and over. Now that compares with only 13% in 2010. If you're a married woman, there's a 70% probability that you'll experience widowhood yourself. The average age a wife becomes a widow is 59. I was actually 60 when my husband died. In fact, it was on my 60th birthday that I sat with him in the midst of a chemo treatment that he was receiving. And a widow may be on her own for many more years, maybe 15 or more. Think of the ramifications for her personally as well as for her financial life specifically without that partner. If you're a man, you'll probably die married, about 80% of you. But conversely, 80% of us women die single. Some ladies will be widowed or divorced, while some will have never married. Here's another very important statistic. 70% of widows fire advisors they used with hubby before he died. That's right. They leave, right along with their money. Why do you think that is? Well, it might be like Anne, who came to my office shortly after the death of her husband. This is what she told me. Mostly our advisor just focused on Ralph. And after he died, the advisor called me to say I needed to sign some paperwork at his office. When I got there, he started talking about how I was beating the market and I should be really glad. And he pulled out some fancy investment charts and reports. I never understood those before, and I really didn't understand them that day. I didn't care if I was beating the market or not. I just wanted to know if I was going to have enough money. Was I going to be okay? Did I have have to live someplace else? Would I have to move out of my house? Did I have to go back to work? Could I continue helping my granddaughter with her college expenses? Could I still give money to my congregation? I felt so confused about all that money stuff. And you know what? He never even used my husband's name. He just kept calling him your deceased spouse. And I started to cry. And he said, well, don't you worry your pretty little head because he was going to take care of everything for me. Well, that comment didn't sit very well, Kathleen, and I just didn't feel right about working with him. So I got up and I left. And I didn't sign his papers either because I didn't know what was in them. Well, his secretary called the next day and wanted to reschedule an appointment, and I told him that I was busy. And that's when I talked to my friend Betty, and she said you had been so helpful after her husband died. And so that's why I'm here, Kathleen. Am I going to be all right? Do I have enough financially? Am I going to be okay? So this was a case where it was an advisor who really didn't understand what she was going through, didn't know how to talk with her, how to deal with her grief. And because of this miscommunication and other factors, the relationship fell apart. And this was an advisor who lost a client, in big part because of not focusing on the personal aspects of financial advising. These statistics can serve as a wake-up call for financial advisors thinking about opportunities to work with this growing demographic. Without their spouse, their partner, many widows feel insecure, and that generally results in a lack of financial confidence. This sometimes means switching or just leaving advisory firms. And in worst case scenarios, it can open the door to financial predators. And believe me, there are charlatans out there. I've heard so many heartbreaking stories of widows who were taken advantage of by what I'll call fake advisors or even greedy family and friends. Also note that many widows are going to be double inheritors in the coming decades. It's estimated that maybe up to $41 trillion will pass from deceased spouses and parents. And it's predicted that 70% of this money will go to women, many who are widows. But if those widows who inherit this money leave their advisors, so does their money. Ouch. But despite these stats, there's very little research about widows and their money issues. In fact, I can count the number of this type of scholarly studies on one hand. That is, empirical, evidence-based research published in peer-reviewed journals. Right now, mainly anecdotal reporting of stories about widows and money has been shared in a few popular and professional publications. There is very limited peer-reviewed scientific method research about widows. When I started trying to find research in this area a few years ago, it just baffled me that there's so little. Baffles Michael Kitces too. Power tweeter Michael Kitces is a financial planner, commentator, speaker, and educator. You might even be a follower of his very popular blog, Nerd's Eye View. He's at conferences and professional publications everywhere. He's prolific. I don't know when the guy has time to sleep even. When he speaks, folks listen. Here's a recent quote where Kitts has commented on this lack of research in financial planning in general. I think research in financial planning is woefully inadequate right now. There's so much we advise on that relies on rules of thumb instead of real, validated research. I think we're especially weak about this when it comes to the science of actually delivering financial planning. Why? Why, some of us ask, is there so little research about widows and financial issues? Indeed, during a recent annual rendezvous conference of the Purposeful Planning Institute, we asked professionals attending my breakout session about this lack of research. Why? Hands shot up immediately as they identified four main reasons. The first one was that it was difficult to access a large national research population of widows. Secondly, a male-dominated financial environment with a preference for investigating and researching other areas. 3, professionals trained about the technical side of financial planning who are uncomfortable working with grieving widows on the personal side. And the fourth one, a lack of research dollars for these studies. Aha, piece of cake. Several of us figured we could overcome most of these problems. And so that's just what we did. Yep, we're all about changing this lack of research. In the fall of 2015, several of us formed a collaborative research team and did our first study together. That involved 1,100 widows. The study, Widows' Voices, The Value of Financial Planning, was published in the January issue of the Journal of Financial Service Professionals. As you probably know, this is a peer-reviewed, scholarly periodical. One of our most statistically significant findings was that widows who work with financial advisors felt more confident in all 9 measures of financial abilities, compared with those who didn't use an advisor. Popular publications started picking up on this research too, and that includes FINRA, the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, with an article about widows in their Alert Investor website. That first study led to our next research project. This tied in with the fact that the face of widowhood has changed. For example, back in the Victorian era, widows wore somber clothing for at least a year, and most mature widows didn't remarry. Today's widow is different, including the fact that some women repartner again after the death of their husband. Take actress Judi Dench, who's 82 years young. She says she wasn't prepared for it and didn't expect to find love again with her new partner after 30 years of marriage and time alone as a widow. I love this actress and her spunk. In fact, she was one of the gals who inspired me to go naturally gray and cut my hair really short last year. On her 81st birthday, Miss Dench got a tattoo of Carpe Diem, seize the day, on her right wrist. Well, I haven't quite gone that far yet, but I sure admire what Judi did. So now, our second study, Helping Repartnered Widows Navigate Romance and Finance, the Role of Financial Advice, will be published in the May 2017 issue of the Journal of Financial Service Professionals. Let's talk specifically about this new study. First, let me introduce you to our collaborative research team. I bet you probably know some of these folks already. Top left is Susan Bradley with the Financial Transitionist Institute, which is a division of Sudden Money Institute. Top right is Dr. John Grable with the University of Georgia. Bottom right is Dr. Carrie West at Schreiner University, and Dr. Linda Leitz, affiliated with Kansas State University and a financial advisor on the lower left. The women in the center are executive directors of the 2 main national nonprofits focused on widows. Middle left is Carolyn Moore with the Modern Widows Club, and Michelle Neff Hernandez on the middle right with Soaring Spirits International. And of course, there's me. As a collaborative team, we were so much stronger than if any of us had tried to do this project individually. In fact, I don't think we could have done it on our own. It would not have been possible. There were so many important pieces that took all of us coming together to do this. Participants in the study were mainly from 2 groups. Most came from the Modern Widows Club. And by the way, this photo was taken during one of their local chapter meetings around the country. Soaring Spirits International was the second biggest participating group. This picture is from one of their regional Camp Widow conference events. These are held every year in Tampa, San Diego, and Toronto. We developed an online survey of 23 questions to measure financial satisfaction and life well-being of repartnered widows. That is, those who had remarried after the death of their spouse or were in a long-term relationship. Members of the Modern Widows Club and Soaring Spirits International were invited to participate, and these groups then spread the news to several other web-based groups of widowed persons all around the world. We had many countries that were a part of this study. And the survey was open for 3 weeks. We had a phenomenal participation rate of 4,216, and amazingly, 90% of everybody who opened their questionnaire answered all the questions. Think of it. How many times have you started an online survey and then partway through just quit? I know I'm guilty of that. We were blown away by the response rate, and this fact alone was a strong indication that these widows wanted to share their stories. Our survey was inclusive, so widowers as well as widows participated. However, the number of guys in the study was really very low, only 4%. So for this article, we just focused on women's responses. However, watch for further articles based on our data set because we did see some differences between widowers and widows in some cases. Maybe sort of a widowers are from Mars and widows are from Venus version. Almost a quarter of the widowed respondents in this study had repartnered, either remarried or entered into a long-term relationship. It's just more complicated now, is what most widows told me when I asked how their money issues are different now in their repartnering compared with their prior marriage back then. Widows were more likely to repartner when they were widowed at a younger age. Mature widows were more apt to only date, but many without being interested in marriage or repartnering, or to not even date at all. We found that widows who were more financially confident and older were less interested in dating, period. You might find it interesting to know that widows met their new partners in a variety of ways. Quite a few of the widows I interviewed for my pre-online survey research project had met in several different ways. Some widows tried online dating, and quite a few of the younger gals successfully met fellows this way. Not so much for the older widows. I even heard a few shocking stories of men who tried to take financial and emotional advantage of these women. He was a psychopath and out to get my money, one widow told me. He became a stalker, and she had to file a restraining order on him. Some reconnected through high school reunions. One couple knew each other since grammar school. They parted ways after high school, married others who later died, and then through a class reunion, ta-da, sparks flew. That was the case with my grandmother, who lived in Wisconsin. She had been widowed for about 20 years when a former classmate came back into her life after his wife died. He still lived in Iowa, where they had gone to school many, many years ago and grown up. He came a-courtin', driving hundreds of miles to visit my grandmother quite frequently. He invited her back, but she refused to move to Iowa unless he put a ring on her finger, and he did just that when he walked her down the aisle in a little country church. My grandmother, a blushing and happy bride, was in her mid-70s then. They enjoyed many good years together before she passed on, leaving him a widow. He never remarried. And a few couples recycled a prior set of 2 couples who were friends before. We didn't miss a beat, a widow in her 80s told me. She was widowed first, and shortly afterwards his wife died. Bingo! They became a new couple. It was only natural for them to console each other and quickly bond. When you're our age, you don't know how much time you got left, so we just wanted to make the most of it, she told me. Other couples met through friends or a shared interest. Everybody who hears about this international study wants to cut to the chase. In other words, what's the bottom line of this study? What were the most important findings of our research? Okay, in a nutshell, here's the number one biggest finding. Repartnered widows who worked with a financial professional before remarrying or entering a long-term relationship are much more satisfied today with how they handle their finances than those who don't work with an advisor. And the highest satisfaction level among repartnered widows was when financial advisors talked to them about their new relationships and the related financial issues to consider. Now, those who didn't use a financial advisor were 3 times more dissatisfied with how they handled their finances compared with those who had used an advisor who talked to them about these personal issues. Here's another important finding. Widows who later repartnered reported being less financially confident at the time they were widowed. Now, intuitively, we believed this for years, but it's nice to have the metrics to prove it. Other findings suggest that financial confidence increases and financial challenges associated with repartnering decrease among widows who work with financial advisors. Ta-da! All good reasons to work with an advisor. Yet many women did not do this. Almost 2/3 of those repartnered widows didn't use any advisor at all. They were missing out on greater possibility of more financial happiness. About 1/4 of our participants said they experienced big financial challenges after they repartnered. Most of those problems centered around feelings of being manipulated by their new partner or otherwise used for their money, financial differences with their partner, and problems with spending, debts, and cash flow. Now, some of these repartnered widows were very remorseful about being blindsided, and in some cases, these financial challenges severely strained their relationships and even ended relationships. It appeared that receiving advice from other widows and those considering repartnering is also important in shaping women's satisfaction and well-being. Indeed, 534 widows took the time to respond to an open-ended survey question that invited them to share advice for other widows who were thinking about remarrying or entering a long-term relationship. Some wrote a few words and many others wrote many paragraphs. I mean, they went on and on with things for other widows to think about. Now, their advice fell into 3 main areas. Over half the suggestions were to go slow and really know what they were doing and the implications of their actions of repartnering. 1/3 of the suggestions emphasized having money conversations with a new partner. And the final group spoke about working with a trusted professional for guidance. Here are just a few of those 534 suggestions. These are direct quotes from the widows. Before beginning to live together, have candid discussions about who pays for what. Will you merge finances? How are you going to do it? Hoping things will work out on their own is not a sound basis to begin a life together. And here's a third one. I didn't bring up the money stuff because I thought it would hurt our relationship before we were married. Boy, was I wrong. We had big disagreements later. There was one lady who talked about she didn't realize that her husband was going to retire so fast. She had retired right before they got remarried. They had agreed that that would be appropriate, a good thing to do. But 6 months into the marriage, she says, I'm going to retire too. And she had watched the numbers, and she really knew that it was going to be hard making it on a very limited Social Security amount and no pensions without him working. Another one, educate yourself so you feel confident about making your own financial decisions. Be careful with your finances. Do not allow anyone to take advantage of you because you're lonely or sad. Understand each other's financial stability and responsibility where money is concerned. And a last example that I'm going to share here is check out the other person's major medical problems. You may not want to take care of another person again. So what does this research mean for financial advisors working with widows? We can't just end with the findings of our study because then it won't really make any difference, will it? I'm going to share 3 general suggestions, but I'd also like you to consider any specific implications for you and your advisory firm as you think about what I mentioned. The first implication for professionals is to find out more. Learn more about working effectively with widows. That means doing just what you're doing now. attending a webinar or a conference session about working with widows. Read articles in professional and scholarly periodicals like the Journal of Financial Service Professionals, the Journal of Financial Therapy, and the Journal of Financial Planning. Maybe join a widow study group for advisors, which you can do if you're part of the Financial Transitionist Institute. We've got a great widows tent that does some nifty things. Because financial advisors typically haven't received training in how to work with widowed clients, they often miss talking about issues related to repartnering or other facets of widowhood. The second suggestion is to enhance the personal side of your financial planning work with widowed clients. There really are two sides to money, the technical or the objective quantifiable side, and the personal or the subjective qualitative side, especially with widows. Both are equally complex and equally important. If a widow moves into a dating or repartnering situation, she can benefit greatly from working with a professional who takes the time to understand her widow's journey. Redesigning a new personal, emotional, and financial life ahead is about so much more than simply rebalancing an investment portfolio and conducting a tax planning session, reevaluating Social Security and Medicare benefits, and all the other common technical advisory activities. Sure, those aspects are very, very important, but if advisors don't go further and ask about a widow's new relationships, they're going to miss a great opportunity to build a meaningful working alliance with her and maybe even with her new partner. Not doing this might also result in losing a client. For those of you in the Financial Transitionist Certification Program, you're learning about and practicing many great tools. I know these are effective with widows because I've used them myself. Now, it's beyond the scope of this brief webinar to cover so many of these tools, but I'll just mention a few that I found to be especially useful with widowed clients. And you can learn more about the Institute by going to their website. The decision-free zone was great for Liz. We used it early on after the sudden death of her husband. This was a first step to create order in the very chaotic shock and awe period immediately after his passing. Now, working together with me, Liz identified essential decisions that needed immediate attention right away. Those were the now items. And the second step was to list non-essential decisions and to agree not to act on them until she had more time to understand her new circumstances. And these were in the soon and later items. And I know this is real tiny print on here. I don't really expect you to read all these things, but just know that they were split into the now activities, soon, and later. So the decision-free process helped her to manage expectations of her family and friends as well as those of herself. And we periodically updated this page as Liz continued to make progress. That also included updating a quote at the top of the page about how she was feeling emotionally at the time. Now, like so many of the Institute's tools, this visual representation is just on one single page. This helps to add simplicity and clarification, making it easier for especially a new widow to process information. This purpose method outcome page helped Liz to connect emotionally with her decisions about how to invest her portfolio. She liked the money buckets concept, and she could easily visualize her 5 basic pots of money. And these 5 incorporated in her own language too, like taking care of myself for the next few years money. And another pot was taking care of myself in the future money. Then there was family legacy money, and buying experience and investing in memories money, and the blessed account to express my gratitude about money. And this colorful one-page sheet clarified why Liz was taking certain actions and how she was going to invest various amounts of money and what her desired outcome will be. For Liz, it was much more effective than a multi-page spreadsheet would ever have been. It's beyond the scope of this brief webinar to cover many of the dozens of other tools here, but I'll just mention a few more that I found to be especially useful with widowed clients. Now, you can learn more about these at the Financial Transitionist Institute. Communication preferences, thought clouds, what has changed, am I okay, bliss list, and personal reinvention. And that personal reinvention actually covers a major chapter for many widows. Here's an example thought cloud page Liz did with me. It was a way to let her name many of her concerns early on after the death of her husband. For example, she identified about 12.5 immediate concerns in these various clouds. Things like planning for the memorial service, how to settle his estate, what to do with life insurance proceeds. What about that special anniversary trip they'd planned for, going to Germany soon? Wondered if she should still try and make it alone. How about caring for her elderly mother? Her husband had coordinated so much of that work before. Whether or not she could continue working at the high executive position, requiring 10 to 12 hours a day without her partner's help with the rest of her life. And much more. Liz felt overwhelmed early on. But by naming many of her concerns, then we were able to later start organizing what important work should begin, rather than being frozen, not being stuck. And as Liz named a fear or a problem, I just put it into a cloud. This is easy to do with a paper and a pencil, or if you're at a computer, just work with a template design, adding your client's own words for various cloud structures. I love the one-page overviews I used with my widowed clients. This is a general one that explains how to make one's money last in retirement after receiving that last paycheck at work. Now, I don't need to go through the whole process with you right now, but it helped clients to visualize what was happening with their various post-retirement income sources and expenses. In fact, I like this approach so much that I adapted it for use with my non-widowed clients too. Now, the goal is to make information easily understandable. It's a visual executive summary of sorts, which seemed to be better understood than a thick retirement financial plan 30-page document that was just words, words, words. So after sharing this with widows, I would generally ask them to explain it back to me, following along with the pictures and the arrows. And most times, they were able to do this. They really got it. A couple of years after her husband's death, Liz had taken care of most of the basic financial and legal and accounting processes, and then she was ready to start looking at the next chapter of her life. The Institute has some wonderful reinvention tools, including a bliss list that focuses on doing for oneself, for family, and for others. It's a way of looking at life in the future. And Liz chose to do some of these activities with me in a retreat format. And she traveled to Saratoga Springs, New York, and that included work time together with time alone to contemplate, plus playtime for recreation. And in this shot, we're in the backyard on a swing going through some things on her bliss list. We took her to the races at the Saratoga track, and she won. Now, she only bet a couple of bucks, but she won, and her horse was definitely a winner. And she learned how to bet. And here's a picture of her winning ticket. And that's right, the first time placing a racing bet, and her horse, Free as a Bird, that was his name, was a winner. She decided that this was a metaphor for her new life ahead, especially since she had recently retired. It was a great, happy time. Liz continues to make great progress on her journey. I've been privileged to help her make some important decisions along the way. As she enters her 4th year of widowhood, many exciting new opportunities are opening for this lady. She's in a new phase of life now, which includes exciting travels and a new romantic relationship. In a recent conversation, she said to me, "Kathleen, I'm just having so much fun. I never dreamed I could possibly have such a wonderful new life." Indeed, Liz is becoming a mentor of sorts in her neighborhood, where several other women have recently become widowed. Liz says it makes her feel good to help other women, especially in their early grief phase. The Bliss List is actually a client workbook with a rich treasure of activities you can pick and choose to use in helping a widow envision and move into the next chapter of her life. Before her retreat with me, I asked Liz to complete this Bliss List preparation page. There she identified hopes, dreams, expectations, and values. In other words, what's important to her. For example, things that make her happy, whom she wants to spend time with, new things she'd like to learn, and what family means to her. This gave us a great basis for conversations about new directions ahead and how this could connect with her money. One example that came out of this exercise was her desire to try some group trip designed for women. We used several more exercises from that Bliss List workbook during our time together. Now, this workbook could be nicely integrated into a group format too. In fact, I've done something like this in the widows workshops I've led. You may want to look more closely at this tool in the client care section of the Institute's website. Yes, Liz is progressing very well through the stages of widowhood, moving from grief to growth, and now starting her transformation or grace stage. She's redesigning her life and loving it. I feel so privileged to have assisted along the way, focusing much of my work on the personal side of advising this lovely lady. It's a real joy to serve widowed clients. I've talked quite a bit about Liz, and you can find other widows' case studies in the Institute's materials too. Also, we cover current client cases during our Widows Special Interest Track telemeetings. That's when members of the group bring up their questions about how to best approach a specific widow that they're working with. And I do some one-on-one mentoring of advisors also as they work with widowed clients. In other words, there's support available for you and these special women that you're serving. A third suggestion is to incorporate what some call difficult questions into meetings with your widowed clients who are repartnering. Here are just a few suggestions, and I'm going to read these along with you and put them up on the screen because I think they're so important. How will money be handled in the new relationship? You're going to commingle it? Going to leave it separate? What? What are the new partner's plans pre and post-retirement? Like the example I gave of the surprise one widow got when her new hubby was going to retire early. Have you talked about a prenuptial or cohabitation agreement? Several of these women did mention prenuptials. Some of them also said they thought about it but didn't go ahead with it because they didn't quite understand how it would work. In another related study that I did before the online survey, I interviewed 24 widows in depth for an hour and a half each. And amazingly, only one of those women had ever heard of a cohabitation agreement. This also includes updating legal docs and healthcare directives. Where will you live? Is it going to be your house or your partner's house? You're going to buy a new house together? Or are you going to become a LAT? Yeah, that's a term, L-A-T, living apart together. And there were a number of these women that I spoke with in the pre-survey interviews, and some who noted it on the actual survey who did not live together, even though they had repartnered or remarried. One lady said, you know, he loves Bach and Beethoven and he plays that all day long, and I'm more of a Frank Sinatra girl. I don't think we could really live together full time. And then she went on also and commented about his messiness and her neatness. If you move out of your current home, will you sell the property? And what are you going to do with the proceeds of that property? Oh, one gal was a bit surprised. They decided to move into his house together. So her house went on the market, sold it, and she planned on putting that into her retirement funds. Well, new hubby thought that they were going to use that to remodel his house, which did need some work to be done. But again, that was a surprise that would not have raised its head had they had a discussion beforehand. Will investments be merged or held separately? Quite a few of the couples did have a joint checking account, although they kept other monies separate, joint checking account or a joint credit card. What if the partner earns substantially less money than you or has fewer assets? This was a biggie for several of the gals who felt uncomfortable with the fact that they had more investments. Some of them owned more homes. They had vacation homes as well as regular homes. And compared to their new partner. One gal had come up with quite a creative solution though, because she said she realized that although she had more financial assets and property than her new husband, he had more income coming in because he had a nice substantial pension plus Social Security, while she only had a small Social Security payment. So that that helped her to equalize the relationship. Have you discussed the possibility of health issues and costs? One of the widows that I was mentoring, who was actually widowed 2 times, was living in a retirement home, and a fellow that she knew there lost his wife. He became a widower and began showing her lots of attention, and she was quite flattered and very excited about it. And it was moving very, very quickly. And when I visited her last, in fact, I was interviewing her for part of the study, she said, I think he's just going to pop the question any day now. Now, this gal was in her late 70s. Her new boyfriend was in his early 90s. So I hadn't heard from her for a while, and I decided to shoot her an email. And I said, well, what's going on? What's happening? She said, well, Chuck had a major heart attack last weekend, and right now we're sort of putting our plans on hold. I know she was rethinking moving forward on marriage because she had actually gone through a very lengthy 7-year nursing of a prior husband who had died. What financial responsibilities are you willing to take on for your partner's children or adult parents? Quite a few of these widows are in sandwich generations where they are responsible for those younger and older. So going to have those discussions with the new partner about what this means for us after we're married again. I heard back from lots of ladies by email after our online research survey and another smaller study I had done that involved interviewing 24 repartnered widows. Most every one of their emails expressed their thanks for the opportunity to talk with me as I listened to their stories. Like I'm saying, these widows want to talk with you about their situation. They want you to hear where they're at. They appreciate a good listener who can ask them insightful questions. These widows want to talk and they want to listen. Now, if you're interested in doing more with widows, you might consider partnering with a widows group in your area and become a Modern Widows Club ambassador sponsor. There are about 18 local chapters across the country now, with 3 more coming on board soon, even one in Zurich, Switzerland. Now, the first Modern Widows Club ambassador came online at the beginning of 2017, and they want to add more sponsors. You can learn more about the Modern Widows Club by going to their website at modernwidowsclub.com. Soaring Spirits International is also considering setting up an ambassador program, but that hasn't begun yet. If your community doesn't yet have a local Modern Widows Club chapter, you might be interested in developing a parallel Moving Forward program, which you would help to facilitate. Members of our Widows Special Interest Track have created this model program that may be a good fit for you also. You might hold group meetings in your office or a more casual setting. If you look closely at this sketch made during a widows gathering, you'll see a notebook computer screen on the back table, a little bit to the right of center. The ladies are watching one of many videos produced by the Modern Widows Club and Carolyn Moore, which are free on YouTube. Each video has a monthly theme, providing a great conversation starting point for the group. It's really all about helping widows to lean into life, build resilience, and make a positive difference in the world. It's so much more, and it's definitely not a grief support group. Your special financial expertise and guidance will be greatly appreciated by these women. Here's a little 1-minute photo collage video from pictures taken the day Liz and I were filmed for 2 PBS television programs about widows and their money. It's another way to build community awareness in support of widows. You too may get local TV coverage of your efforts to help educate and inform widows. We're thinking about writing 2 e-booklets related to our work with widows. One is tentatively titled Living Forward, and this will be for advisors working with widows. And the second e-booklet, The Widow's Guide to Beginning Anew, will be for widows who have passed the initial grief stages and are at the point of moving into their next chapter. And this can just be such a beautiful time of redesigning their new life. Now, of course, money matters will be a special focus with both of these booklets. You'll find many articles and some blogs related to widows and money on my website. That's at kathleenreal.com. In the tools section of my website, there are several free e-booklets that might be useful for you. One is especially for your clients. That's Financial Steps for Recent Widows. You can simply download and print this in booklet format. It's absolutely free, and you've got my permission to use any and all of this stuff as long as you don't change the content and you give me proper attribution and you're not charging money for what you're producing. Now I'm inviting you to connect with me after this webinar. You can reach me at this email address that you can see on the screen. That's kathleen@kathleenreal.com. I'd love to hear your answers to one or more of the following questions that you'll see on the next page. Why do you enjoy working with widows? What's been an effective way for you to connect with and engage widowed clients? What advice would you give other financial advisors thinking about working with widows? What should we be researching about widows and their money issues? Do you have a possible collaboration idea in which you'd like to be involved? And that could be either research, or it could be writing, or it could be creation of tools to assist widows, all kinds of possibilities there. Or just write to me about anything else this webinar made you think about.
Before you leave, I'm inviting you into my home, because in the great room, I want to show you a beautiful original ceramic piece of art known as Butterflies in Flight. I got this at a wonderful art festival a couple of years ago, and it just gives me a lot of joy every time I look at it. And that's because of the butterflies, the story of the metamorphosis of the butterfly. That always fascinated me. And I used to think that what happened was caterpillar just ate a bunch of leaves, and then when the time was right, she spun a cocoon and then grew little legs and fancy wings, and then off she flew. That's not what happens at all. What really happens is that that caterpillar, yes, eats a lot and spins the cocoon, but then inside of the cocoon, everything liquefies. It turns into this goopy, soupy mass. In fact, that's the scientific term for it, goop. In fact, if you were to slice open the caterpillar's cocoon, it would just ooze out the bottom. Now, within this soupy mass, there are cells known as imaginal cells. They have the image of the future butterfly in them. And initially, there are just a few of these imaginal cells. And the other cells fight against them. They don't like them because they're taken over. But the imaginal cells continue to grow and they clump, and their image of the beautiful butterfly begins to take over. So then, when the butterfly is ready to come out of the cocoon, she still has to make a hole through it and fight to get her way out. And then once she's out, she lands on a branch or a twig, and she has to dry. Only then can she fly off when her wings are stronger. A lot different than what I thought it was all about. And in fact, research shows that the longer the butterfly fights to get out of that cocoon, probably the longer she's going to live. And you know, there's a lot of parallels with widows. For many of us widows, when our husbands died, we experienced the same meltdown. But slowly over time, our own imaginal cells began to take over as we imagined what we wanted our new future to be. And following that, we too become butterflies. So I want to thank you again for all the work that you are doing with the widows that you are serving to help them imagine a better future And then with your tools and your care, you are helping them to transform into that beautiful new butterfly and a great new life ahead. Thank you very much.
That journey from grief to transformation has taken me about a decade, and I'm still transforming, which is really rather exciting for this 70-year-old. When my husband died 10 years ago, I never imagined what the future ahead would bring. And that decade has included navigating my own romance and finance stories. Yep, I'm one of the widows who chose to repartner, happily repartner. So I have a real special interest in our research. My partner is a widower, a retired nuclear engineer, and a loving companion who also believes in this important work I'm doing to benefit my widowed sisters. Yes, I will always love my late husband, but I just love him in a different way now. And I have chosen to move forward, to embrace life fully with all of its new joys and opportunities, which includes two wonderful little grandsons, as I'm living a really real life. Now that is an intended pun. I greatly appreciate your interest in working with widows. You are the ones on the front line with them now. I used to assist many widows in my financial planning practice, but I've passed that baton along to you. That's your work now. I just helped to create some of your support materials and applaud your efforts from the sidelines. So I'll close with a special blessing for you for all your wonderful work in helping my widowed sisters. Thank you so very much.